I still remember the way my heels clicked against the marble floors of Reeves Innovations, a sound that once filled me with pride but now echoed like a cruel reminder of how invisible I had become. To everyone, my husband Michael, his conniving colleague Sarah, even the employees who smiled politely as they passed me in the hall, I was nothing more than a name on paper, a figurehead without substance. The world saw Michael as the brilliant CEO steering our company toward greatness, while I played the role of the dutiful wife, content to sip champagne at galas and sign checks for charity events. But behind this carefully constructed facade lay a truth so well guarded that even Michael didn't suspect it. I was the true owner of Reeves Innovations. My father, Robert Reeves, had built this empire from the ground up, pouring his heart into every decision, every innovation. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left the company not to Michael, but to me, through an intricate trust designed to protect his legacy and me from those who might seek to exploit us. Only 3 people knew the truth: myself, our family liar Gerald, and James Wilson, my father's oldest confidant. Everyone else believed what they were meant to believe, that Michael was the mastermind, the visionary leader. And why wouldn't they? He spoke confidently in board meetings, shook hands with investors, and basked in the admiration of colleagues like Sarah, whose saccharine smiles masked her ambition and disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. But oh, how they underestimated me. They thought I was just another trophy wife, too naive or too fragile to understand the complexities of business. At dinner parties, Sarah would lean close to Michael, laughing at his jokes while subtly mocking my decorative presence. "It must be nice," she'd say loud enough for me to hear, "to live such a carefree life. No stress, no responsibilities." Her words dripped with condescension, but I merely smiled, letting her believe she had won. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent years watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Every financial report, every board meeting, every whispered conversation between Michael and his cronies had been meticulously documented by me. My father had taught me everything I needed to know before he died, but I kept my knowledge hidden, biding my time until the perfect storm arrived. The cracks in their perfect illusion began to show when I overheard Michael and Sarah laughing together late one evening, a sound that shattered something deep inside me. Their voices carried through the thin walls of the office building, sharp and cutting, as they mocked my supposed ignorance. "She doesn't even have a real job," Sarah sneered. "She just sits at home all day while you do all the work." Michael chuckled, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Emma's never had a head for business," he said dismissively. "She thinks I'm working late on the Jones account." That night, as I pressed my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering in my chest, I realized the full extent of their betrayal. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the deliberate dismantling of my father's legacy, piece by piece, for their own gain. And in that moment, I vowed to make them see exactly who I was, not the woman they thought they controlled, but the force that would bring them to their knees. The office Christmas party was always the highlight of the year at Reeves Innovations, strings of golden lights draped across the grand ballroom, a live jazz band playing softly in the background, and an open bar that seemed to loosen everyone's inhibitions just enough. For Emma, it had once been a night to look forward to, a chance to celebrate her father's legacy alongside the people who helped build it. But now, as she stood by the edge of the crowd, sipping champagne, she felt like nothing more than a ghost haunting her own memories. Sarah, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress that screamed confidence, was holding court near the center of the room, flanked by Michael and several senior executives. Her laugh carried over the hum of conversation, sharp and cutting, drawing attention wherever she went. Emma tried to focus on the flickering candlelight reflecting off her gloss, but Sarah's voice pierced through her attempt at calm. Sarah said loudly, tilting her head toward Michael as though sharing some private joke. I've always wondered what it must be like to live Emma's life. No stress, no responsibilities. Just sitting at home all day while someone else handles everything. The group around her erupted into polite laughter, though their eyes darted uncomfortably between Emma and Sarah. Michael chuckled along, his arm resting too casually on Sarah's shoulder. It sounds pretty great, doesn't it? He added, his tone light, but his words heavy with condescension. Emma's grip tightened around her champagne flute, her knuckles whitening beneath her skin. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, waiting for a reaction. Would she cry? Snap back? Or worse, crumble under the pressure? But instead, she forced a smile, raising her glass slightly in mock celebration. To privilege, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the music. Then, turning away before anyone could respond, she walked toward the balcony doors, desperate for fresh air. The cold December wind hit her face like a slap, grounding her momentarily. Inside, Sarah leaned closer to Michael, lowering her voice so only he could hear. See? She doesn't even care enough to fight back. What does she really contribute around here? Michael shrugged, his expression smug. Not much, he admitted. But she's good at keeping up appearances, at least until we're ready to make our move. Their laughter followed Emma outside, twisting in her ears like venom. That night, as Emma drove home alone, Michael having stayed behind to network, she replayed the scene over and over in her mind. Each word Sarah had spoken felt like a shard of glass embedding itself deeper into her chest. Yet, amidst the pain, something else stirred, anger. Not the fleeting kind, but the slow-burning fury of someone realizing they've been underestimated for far too long. As she parked in front of their house, she whispered to herself, "They think I'm weak. Let them believe that for now." It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a quiet moment in the office after everyone had gone home, a chance for Emma to catch up on some paperwork. But as she approached Michael's office, intending to drop off a document he'd forgotten, the sound of laughter stopped her in her tracks. Not just any laughter, Sarah's high-pitched giggle intertwined with Michael's deep chuckle, a sound that used to bring warmth to her heart but now made it feel like shards of glass were cutting through her chest. She froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob as their voices carried through the thin walls. "She doesn't even have a real job," Sarah said, her tone dripping with mockery. "She just sits at home all day while you do all the work." Emma's breath caught, her pulse quickening. She recognized Sarah's habit of twirling her perfect blonde hair around her finger, a gesture Emma had noticed during company Christmas parties where Sarah always seemed to find ways to stand closer to Michael than necessary. "I don't know how you put up with it," Sarah continued, her voice laced with venom. "It's complicated," Michael replied, his voice dropping into that conspiratorial tone he used when trying to sound important, the same tone he'd once used with Emma years ago when they first met. "Emma's never had a head for business," he added dismissively. "She thinks I'm working late on the Jones account." Their laughter echoed through the empty hallway, each note piercing deeper into Emma's soul. Her knees weakened, and she pressed her back against the cold wall, clutching the document tightly in her hands. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was far worse. As she listened further, their conversation shifted from personal ridicule to something far more sinister. They began discussing the upcoming merger, a deal that would dismantle everything her father had built. "The research division is dead weight," Michael said, his voice sharp and calculated. "Once we sell it off, we'll have enough leverage to push through the restructuring plan." Sarah chimed in enthusiastically, "And with my name attached to the new leadership structure, we'll finally get the recognition we deserve." Emma's heart sank as she pieced together their scheme. The research division wasn't just another department. It was the heart of Reeves Innovations, the very legacy her father had poured his life into. Yet here they were, plotting to destroy it for their own gain. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away, her fury building like a storm. She realized then that this wasn't just about her marriage or her pride, it was about protecting her father's dream, the company that bore his name. As she slipped away silently, her mind raced with possibilities. Every word she'd overheard became ammunition, every detail a weapon she could use. She didn't cry or scream. Instead, she felt a cold determination settle over her. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. And Emma Reeves was ready to fight back. The air in the hallway felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in on Emma. She had returned to the office late that evening under the pretense of retrieving a forgotten file, but now she stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold wall, listening to the conversation that would change everything. Through the thin ventilation system, every word was painfully clear. Sarah's voice, sharp and calculating, slicing through the silence like a knife. "I don't think we should wait much longer," Sarah said, her tone dripping with impatience. "Once the merger goes through, we'll have enough leverage to push her out completely. She won't fight it. She never fights anything." Emma's breath hitched at the casual cruelty in Sarah's words, each syllable landing like a blow. Push her out? The phrase echoed in her mind, raw and unforgiving. They weren't just planning to dismantle her father's legacy, they were plotting to erase her from her own life. Michael's response sent a chill down her spine. "Emma wouldn't dare do anything," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "She's too weak to even understand what's going on. She thinks I'm working late on the Jenkins account, for God's sake." His laughter followed, low and dismissive, as if her existence were nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Emma's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst out of her chest. Her knees buckled, and she slid down the wall, clutching the edge of her blazer as though it could anchor her to reality. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined, not just the affair, not just the conspiracy against the company, but the sheer audacity of their plan to discard her as though she were nothing. They thought she was powerless, a pawn in their game. But what they didn't realize was that this moment their careless words, their arrogance, would become the spark that ignited her resolve. As she sat there trembling, fragments of memories flooded her mind. Michael's patronizing kisses on her forehead, Sarah's smug smiles during company events, the way everyone underestimated her because she chose to stay in the shadows. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And now, hearing them plot her removal, she understood something crucial. They had underestimated her for the last time. Forcing herself to stand, Emma steadied her breathing, though her hands still trembled. She glanced at the document in her hand, the one she had come to retrieve, and realized its significance had shifted. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was evidence. Every financial report, every email, every decision made in that office was part of the web she had been quietly weaving. And now, armed with their own words, she knew exactly how to tighten the noose around them. The days that followed the devastating revelation were a masterclass in self-control for Emma. She didn't cry. She didn't confront Michael or Sarah. She simply smiled her practiced smile and played the role they expected her to play. By day, she was the docile wife, asking innocently about Michael's late nights at work, and even suggesting he take Sarah to dinner to discuss that Jenkins account. But by night, she transformed into someone else entirely, the strategist plotting her next move. Every piece of evidence she gathered felt like assembling fragments of a weapon she would use to dismantle their empire of lies. She began with small steps, reviewing financial reports that Michael had carelessly left on his desk, cross-referencing them with emails she found buried deep in his laptop when he forgot to log out. Each discovery was a blow, a confirmation that the betrayal ran deeper than she'd imagined. They weren't just stealing her dignity, they were stealing her father's legacy, manipulating numbers to justify cutting funding from the research division he had built with his own hands. The weight of this realization pressed down on her chest, but it also fueled her determination. At the same time, Emma reached out to those who still remembered her father, the loyal employees and executives who had been sidelined under Michael's leadership. James Wilson, her father's oldest friend and former business partner, was the first person she called. "You have no idea how long I've waited for you to step up," he said over coffee in a quiet corner of his club. His eyes, sharp despite his age, scanned her face as if searching for traces of the girl he'd known years ago. "Your father always said you were smarter than you let on. He believed you'd rise to the occasion when it mattered most." Emma swallowed hard, the responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "I'm here now," she replied firmly, "and I need your help." Over the following weeks, Emma worked tirelessly to rebuild alliances. She met secretly with members of the research team, listening intently as they explained how Michael and Sarah had systematically ignored their groundbreaking projects. One scientist, visibly frustrated, slammed his hand on the table during their meeting. "They think we're expendable," he exclaimed. "But without us, this company is nothing more than a hollow shell." Emma nodded, her jaw tightening. "Not anymore," she promised. "Together, we'll remind them what Reeves Innovations really stands for." While Michael continued to underestimate her, believing her oblivious to his schemes, Emma meticulously prepared her counterattack. She commissioned an independent audit of the company's finances, ensuring every manipulated figure was documented. Every email between Michael and Sarah discussing their plans became ammunition. And through it all, she maintained her facade of indifference, smiling brightly whenever Michael patted her hand condescendingly and told her not to worry about business matters. But inside, she was steeling herself for the battle ahead, a battle she knew would restore justice and honor her father's memory. The deeper Emma dug into the financial records, the more her blood ran cold. What started as a routine review of quarterly reports turned into a chilling revelation. Michael and Sarah had been systematically siphoning funds from the research division, the very heart of Reeves Innovations, and funneling them into pet projects that benefited only themselves. The numbers didn't lie. Budget cuts disguised as necessary restructuring had left the department operating on a shoestring, while millions were redirected to initiatives labeled vaguely as strategic growth opportunities. But these so-called opportunities had one thing in common. They all funneled directly through accounts, controlled by Sarah and approved by Michael. Emma's hands trembled as she sifted through spreadsheets late one night in Michael's office, her pulse racing every time the floorboards creaked beneath her feet. She knew she was playing with fire. If caught, there would be no plausible explanation for why she was poring over confidential documents at 2 a.m. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. Panicking, she shoved the papers back into the drawer and grabbed the first book her fingers touched, a dusty copy of Leadership Strategies, pretending to skim its pages as though searching for something mundane. When Diane, the receptionist, peeked in to ask if everything was okay, Emma forced a casual smile. "Just looking for some inspiration," she said lightly, holding up the book. Diane nodded, seemingly satisfied, but not before giving Emma a lingering look that made her stomach churn. Had Diane suspected something? Or worse, had she already guessed? Later that week, during a clandestine meeting with James Wilson, Emma shared her findings. James listened intently, his weathered face growing graver with each detail. "I've suspected Michael for years," he admitted finally, his voice low and heavy with regret. "But I didn't want to confront him, not without proof, because I feared how it might hurt you." His words hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken guilt. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Your father always warned me about people like him. Trust your instincts, Robert used to say. But I let loyalty cloud my judgment. For that, I'm sorry. As Emma absorbed his apology, she realized just how isolated she had been, not because others hadn't cared, but because they had underestimated her ability to handle the truth. It was a bitter pill to swallow, yet it fueled her determination even further. That night, lying awake beside Michael, she replayed James's words in her mind. Her father's legacy wasn't just being dismantled, it was being betrayed by those who were supposed to protect it. And now, armed with evidence and allies, Emma vowed to ensure that justice would prevail, not just for herself, but for everything her father had built. The morning of the board meeting dawned with an almost cruel clarity, as if the universe itself was preparing for the reckoning that would unfold. Emma stood in front of her mirror, fastening the diamond earrings her father had given her years ago, the same ones he'd said were meant for when you're ready to show the world who you really are. She exhaled slowly, her reflection staring back at her with a resolve that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just about reclaiming her company. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that she was no longer the woman they thought she could control. When she entered the Reeves Innovations building, heads turned. Employees who had barely noticed her presence before now watched her stride through the lobby with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Diane, the receptionist who had known her since childhood, handed her a small envelope containing final confirmations from loyal executives. Good luck, Mrs. Reeves, Diane whispered, her voice trembling with respect. Emma simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Inside the boardroom, Michael's confident voice boomed as he outlined the supposed benefits of the merger. Selling off the research division will streamline operations and maximize shareholder value, he declared, his tone dripping with arrogance. Sitting beside him, Sarah leaned forward slightly, her posture radiating smugness. They were so certain of their victory that neither noticed the doors opening or the figure stepping into the room like a storm cloud. Emma walked in without knocking, her presence commanding immediate attention. 15 pairs of eyes turned toward her, but it was Michael's face that froze mid-sentence. Emma, he managed, his voice faltering. This is unexpected. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed a leather portfolio on the table, its weight echoing ominously in the silence. Before any votes are taken, she began, her voice steady and cutting through the tension. The board should be aware of some critical information. She distributed documents detailing the true financial state of the company, the independent audit results, and damning emails between Michael and Sarah discussing their manipulations. As Richard Keller, one of the newer board members, flipped through the pages, his face paled. What is this? He demanded, looking between Emma and Michael. This, Emma said, taking a seat at the head of the table that had remained conspicuously empty until now, is proof of systematic betrayal, not just of me, but of everything my father built. The screen lit up with trust documentation, clearly showing Emma's 51% ownership stake. Sarah gasped audibly, while Michael's face drained of color. You can't do this, Sarah stammered, standing abruptly. I've worked too hard for this. No, Emma corrected coldly, her gaze piercing. You've taken too much. There's a difference. One by one, the board members turned against Michael and Sarah, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Reject the merger, terminate Michael as CEO, and remove Sarah entirely. As security escorted them out, Sarah screamed accusations, but Emma remained unmoved, her eyes fixed firmly ahead. The moment Emma stepped into the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted like a storm front rolling in. She wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, reminiscent of the ones her father had favored during pivotal moments in his career. The earrings she had chosen, the diamond studs her father gifted her on her 21st birthday, glinted sharply under the overhead lights, catching the eyes of everyone in the room. They weren't just jewelry. They were symbols of her inheritance, her resolve, and the legacy she was determined to protect. As she moved toward the head of the table, her heels clicking with purpose against the polished floor, Michael's initial surprise quickly morphed into an attempt at control. "Emma," he said, his voice laced with forced calm, "this really isn't the time or place for interruptions. Why don't you wait outside?" His words dripped with condescension, as though dismissing her presence would make her vanish like a fleeting inconvenience. But Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she placed a leather portfolio on the table, a gesture that silenced the murmurs, rippling through the room, and locked eyes with him. "Oh, I think this is exactly where I need to be," she replied coolly, her voice steady enough to cut through steel. As she began distributing documents detailing the financial manipulations orchestrated by Michael and Sarah, the color drained from Michael's face. Each page revealed damning evidence, falsified projections, unauthorized transfers, and emails meticulously cataloging their betrayal. The once confident smirk he wore dissolved into a mask of panic. He glanced at Sarah, seeking some semblance of support, but she was already unraveling. "No," Sarah shrieked, rising abruptly from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't do this. I've given everything to this company." Her voice cracked, hysteria bubbling beneath the surface. Emma turned to face her, her expression unyielding. "No," she corrected, her tone icy yet composed. "You've taken everything you could from this company. There's a difference." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the stunned silence of the board members. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Meanwhile, Michael sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to form a coherent defense. Emma's gaze swept across the room, meeting each pair of wide eyes with quiet authority. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. And as the reality of their downfall settled over them, she felt not triumph, but clarity. She had reclaimed not only her company, but also her identity. The moment the boardroom doors closed behind Michael and Sarah, their descent began to fall as swift and merciless as the schemes they had once orchestrated. Security guards escorted them through the lobby, their footsteps echoing like a funeral march against the marble floors. Employees who had once admired or feared them now stared openly, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah clutched her designer handbag tightly, tears streaming down her face, streaking her mascara into dark rivers that mirrored the chaos within her. "This can't be happening," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling with disbelief. But it was happening, and there was no turning back. Michael, on the other hand, seemed frozen in time, his expression oscillating between rage and denial. His polished suit, which had always been a symbol of his power, now felt like a costume he couldn't shed fast enough. As they reached the front doors, reporters alerted by an anonymous tip were already waiting outside, cameras flashing like strobe lights in a nightmare. "Mr. Reeves! Miss Walker! Any comment on your sudden departure from Reeves Innovations?" one shouted. Michael recoiled, shielding his face with his arm, while Sarah stumbled forward, her heels catching on the cracks of the pavement. The humiliation was complete. Two people who had prided themselves on control were now utterly exposed, stripped of everything they had taken for granted. In the weeks that followed, their reputations unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. Legal notices arrived daily, each letter more damning than the last. The financial manipulations Emma had uncovered became public knowledge, splashed across industry headlines with titles like Reeves' Scandal, Greed, and Betrayal at its finest. Clients who had once flocked to Michael's charisma and Sarah's promises now distanced themselves, fearing association with such blatant misconduct. Even their peers turned away, refusing to acknowledge them at networking events or conferences. I heard Michael's trying to sell real estate in Arizona. Diane, the receptionist, mentioned casually during a lunch meeting with Emma 6 months later. Her tone carried a mix of amusement and disdain. And Sarah? She's working for her father's small accounting firm back in Ohio. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who had mocked Emma for being decorative was now reduced to balancing spreadsheets for local businesses. But perhaps the cruelest blow came when Michael realized he would never regain entry into the world he had once dominated. His LinkedIn profile, once filled with accolades and glowing endorsements, went silent save for an occasional desperate attempt to market himself as a consultant. No one responded. Meanwhile, Sarah's name became synonymous with betrayal in corporate circles, whispered as a cautionary tale about ambition gone too far. Their dreams of power, wealth, and prestige dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only bitterness and regret. Moved to escort Michael and Sarah out of the building, the scene descended into chaos. Sarah, her perfectly styled facade crumbling, clawed at the arms of the guards in a desperate attempt to resist. "This isn't fair," she screamed, tears streaming down her face, smudging her mascara into dark streaks that mirrored her shattered ambitions. "You can't do this to me. I've given everything for this company." Her voice cracked with hysteria, echoing through the marble lobby like a wounded animal's cry. But Emma stood firm, her expression unreadable, watching as the woman who had mocked her for being decorative was now reduced to a sobbing mess. Michael, on the other hand, didn't resist physically. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Emma, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath, his voice low but venomous. "Mark my words, Emma." His threat hung in the air, heavy with unspoken malice, but Emma merely met his glare with cold indifference. She had spent months preparing for this moment, ensuring that every piece of evidence was irrefutable. She knew his threats were empty, just another attempt to regain control in a situation where he had none. In the weeks that followed, Michael refused to accept defeat. Fueled by anger and humiliation, he filed a lawsuit against Emma, claiming she had acted out of personal vendetta and demanding compensation for what he described as wrongful termination. The media latched onto the story, painting it as a bitter divorce battle intertwined with corporate drama. For a brief moment, Emma felt the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on her. But she remained calm, knowing that the truth would ultimately prevail. When the court proceedings began, Emma presented the mountain of evidence she had meticulously gathered: falsified financial reports, emails detailing their conspiracy, and even recordings of Michael's dismissive remarks about her supposed ignorance. The judge listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave as the extent of their misconduct came to light. By the end of the trial, not only was Michael's lawsuit dismissed, but he was also ordered to pay substantial civil penalties for his role in the financial manipulations. As the verdict was read aloud, Michael sat frozen, his face pale with shock. Sarah, seated beside him, buried her head in her hands, unable to face the reality of their downfall. Emma, however, felt no satisfaction in their defeat. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. The man who had once belittled her, who had tried to strip her of her legacy, was now exposed for the fraud he truly was. And as she walked out of the courtroom, her posture straight and her head held high, she whispered to herself, "It's over." 6 months after the upheaval at Reeves Innovations, The company underwent a transformation so profound that it became the subject of business school case studies. Under Emma's leadership, the research division once marked for dismantling by Michael and Sarah emerged as the beating heart of innovation once again. The breakthrough came when a team of scientists, previously sidelined under Michael's regime, unveiled a revolutionary product that redefined their industry. It wasn't just an incremental improvement. It was a leap forward, one that competitors scrambled to replicate but couldn't match. Within weeks, the stock price doubled, vindicating every decision Emma had made to protect her father's legacy. The success felt surreal, almost otherworldly, as if her father's spirit had guided her hand through every challenge. Emma often found herself sitting in what had been his office, now restored to its former glory, staring at the photographs lining the walls. In those quiet moments, she could almost hear his voice saying, "You've done well, Emma. You've made me proud." Yet the weight of responsibility never left her shoulders. Every late night spent reviewing proposals, every meeting where she championed bold ideas over short-term profits, it all reminded her how close she had come to losing everything. In a symbolic gesture of renewal, Emma sold the sprawling house she had shared with Michael, a place that had never truly felt like home, and moved into a modest apartment closer to the office. She kept only a few cherished items: her father's old desk, the earrings he'd given her, and a framed photo of them together on her 21st birthday. The rest she donated or discarded, shedding the remnants of a life built on pretense. Gone were the days of hosting lavish dinner parties to maintain appearances. Instead, her evenings were filled with strategy sessions, brainstorming with key employees who had stood by her during the darkest times. One evening, as she hosted a small gathering at her new home, James Wilson raised his glass in a toast. "To Emma," he said, his voice warm with admiration, "who proved that still waters run the deepest." The room erupted in applause, but Emma's thoughts drifted back to the woman she used to be, the one who had hidden in plain sight, too afraid to step into her own power. Now, standing among people who respected her not because of her name, but because of her actions, she realized how far she had come. Her phone buzzed later that night with congratulatory messages about their latest quarterly results. Where such accolades had once gone to Michael, they now flowed directly to her. As she looked out at the city lights from her terrace, she whispered to herself, "They thought I was weak. They thought I was nothing. But I was always everything they underestimated." 6 months after reclaiming control of Reeves Innovations, Emma stood on the stage of the company's grand auditorium, her heart swelling with pride as she looked out at the sea of faces before her. The breakthrough product that had once been dismissed by Michael and Sarah as a waste of resources was now the crown jewel of the company, generating revenue streams that surpassed even her father's most ambitious projections. It wasn't just a triumph for the research team, it was a vindication of everything her father had believed in: innovation, perseverance, and the power of trust. The irony wasn't lost on Emma. She remembered the board meeting where Michael had argued passionately for cutting funding to the very project that now saved the company. "It's dead weight," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain. Sarah had nodded in agreement, her lips curling into a smug smile. At the time, Emma had seethed silently, but now, standing under the spotlight, she felt nothing but gratitude for their arrogance, for their short-sightedness, and for the opportunity it had given her to prove them wrong. That evening, Emma hosted a gala to honor the employees who had remained loyal to her father's vision, many of whom had been marginalized under Michael's leadership. As the lights dimmed and a slideshow of archival photos illuminated the screen behind her, images of her father shaking hands with early investors, celebrating milestones with the team, and mentoring young engineers, Emma stepped up to the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly at first, heavy with emotion, but grew steadier as she spoke. "We didn't just build a company," she began, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gazes of those who had stood by her through the darkest days. "We built a family that believes in the power of ideas, in the strength of collaboration, and in the legacy of a man who gave everything to make this dream a reality." The room erupted into applause, but Emma continued, her tone firm and resolute. "To those who doubted us, who tried to dismantle what we hold dear, your failure is our foundation. And to those who stayed, who fought alongside me when the odds were against us, you are the heart of Reeves Innovations." As the applause reached a crescendo, Emma caught sight of James Wilson wiping a tear from his eye. Diane, the receptionist who had quietly supported her during the upheaval, gave her a thumbs up from the back of the room. Emma smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment wash over her. The product that Michael and Sarah had deemed worthless had not only saved the company, but had also restored its soul. And as she descended from the stage, she whispered to herself, "Dad, I hope you're proud." The betrayal cut deeper than any wound Emma had ever imagined, a blade that sliced through her heart with every memory of Michael's dismissive remarks and Sarah's mocking laughter. At night, when the world was quiet and the weight of her solitude pressed down on her, she could still hear their voices echoing in her mind, voices that had once dismissed her as nothing more than a shadow in Michael's life. But amidst the pain, something else began to take root within her: clarity. The same betrayal that had shattered her also became the catalyst for her transformation. It was as if the cracks in her soul let light pour in, illuminating strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Emma remembered the first time she truly looked at herself in the mirror after discovering Michael and Sarah's plans. Her reflection stared back at her, not with the fragility she had once carried, but with a quiet fire burning behind her eyes. "You underestimated me," she whispered to the image, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. That moment marked the beginning of her awakening, a shift from the woman who had allowed herself to be defined by others' perceptions to someone who refused to shrink any longer. Every insult, every condescending remark they had thrown her way became fuel for her resolve. When Sarah had sneered, "She just sits at home all day," or when Michael had casually remarked, "Emma's never had a head for business," they hadn't realized they were describing the very qualities that would make her unstoppable. She had spent years observing, learning, and waiting, not because she was weak, but because she understood the power of timing. And now, armed with their underestimation and her own unyielding determination, she emerged stronger than ever. By the time she stood in the boardroom, commanding the attention of those who had once doubted her, Emma knew she was no longer the same person. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been replaced by an unshakable confidence. She no longer sought validation from anyone, least of all from Michael or Sarah. Their betrayal had stripped away the layers of self-doubt she had unknowingly carried, leaving behind a version of herself that was raw, real, and unapologetically powerful. As she walked out of the building on the evening of the board meeting, her heels clicking against the marble floor, Emma felt a profound sense of liberation. The pain of betrayal hadn't vanished entirely, it lingered like a scar, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come. She wasn't just reclaiming her father's legacy, she was reclaiming herself. For the first time in years, she felt whole. The night air was cool against her skin as Emma sat on the balcony of her new apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly before her like a sea of stars. It had been exactly 1 year since the boardroom confrontation that had changed everything, and though the scars of betrayal still lingered, they no longer controlled her. Her phone buzzed softly, breaking the quiet hum of the evening. The caller ID read Jessica Lane, Financial Times. Emma hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice calm but curious. Ms. Reeves, the reporter began, her tone tinged with admiration. Your transformation over the past year has been nothing short of remarkable. What sparked such a dramatic change? Emma leaned back in her chair, the question stirring memories she had tried to bury, the laughter echoing through the ventilation system, Sarah's smug smile, Michael's dismissive remarks. For a brief second, the pain threatened to resurface, but she pushed it down, replacing it with the clarity that had become her guiding light. I didn't change, Emma replied finally, her voice steady and deliberate. Others just never saw me for who I truly was. The words hung in the air, simple yet profound, as if shedding layers of pretense she had worn for years. After hanging up, Emma let the silence envelop her, her thoughts drifting back to that fateful night when she had pressed her back against the cold office wall, her heart hammering so fiercely she feared it might burst. She remembered the crack in her soul, the first fracture before the flood, and how it had forced her to confront truths she had long ignored. If not for that fall, if not for the betrayal that had shattered her illusion of a perfect life, she might never have found the strength to rise again. Her fingers tightened around the glass of wine in her hand as she thought about the countless nights spent strategizing, the secret meetings with loyal employees, the painstaking process of gathering evidence. Each step had been a lesson, each setback a reminder that resilience wasn't born from comfort but from chaos. If I hadn't fallen, she whispered to herself, staring out at the glittering skyline, I wouldn't have learned how to stand. In that moment, Emma realized something crucial. The woman she had become wasn't defined by Michael's betrayal or Sarah's cruelty, but by her refusal to be diminished by them. They had underestimated her, yes, but their mistake had given her the chance to reclaim not only her father's legacy, but also her own identity. As the wind tousled her hair, she smiled faintly, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and for the first time she truly felt unstoppable. The boardroom doors closed behind Michael and Sarah, their defeat final and irrevocable. Emma stood alone now, the weight of Reeves' innovations resting squarely on her shoulders. It was a burden she had once feared, but now it felt like armor protecting not just her father's legacy, but her own identity. The room seemed quieter than ever, save for the faint hum of the city outside. She walked to the head of the table where Michael had sat only hours ago, his arrogance still lingering in the air like a ghost. Placing her hands firmly on the polished surface, she took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what she had achieved settle over her. Emma wasn't the same woman who had tiptoed through this building, shrinking under the dismissive gazes of others. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and doubt and emerged stronger. Every insult from Sarah, every condescending remark from Michael, had forged her into someone unrecognizable from the fragile figure they had underestimated. They thought I was nothing, she whispered aloud, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. But I was always everything they never saw coming. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood on the terrace of her new apartment, overlooking the glittering skyline. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages, each one a testament to how far she'd come. Once, these accolades would have gone to Michael. Now they flowed directly to her. For a moment, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey, the sleepless nights, the secret meetings, the moments when she doubted herself and realized that without the fall, she might never have learned to rise. Turning away from the view, Emma caught her reflection in the glass door. The woman staring back at her was no longer defined by pain or betrayal, but by resilience and strength. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, I didn't just reclaim a company. I reclaimed myself. On the anniversary of her father's death, Emma stood before his grave, the cold marble headstone bearing his name, a stark contrast to the vibrant man she remembered. In her hands, she held a bouquet of white roses, his favorite, and as she knelt to place them gently at the base, she felt the weight of everything she had endured settle around her like an invisible cloak. The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and memory. "I did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling within her. "I protected what you built, just as I promised." Her fingers traced the engraved letters of his name, each stroke a reminder of the man who had taught her resilience, integrity, and the value of quiet strength. But this moment wasn't just about fulfilling a vow, it was about something deeper, something transformative. "And more than that," she continued, her voice growing firmer, "I found myself. The woman I am now isn't the one they tried to diminish or control. She's stronger, braver, and unafraid to stand alone." As she rose to her feet, Emma turned her gaze skyward, the vast expanse of stars stretching endlessly above her. The night was crisp, the air tinged with the sharpness of autumn. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze brush against her face, then opened them again, her expression resolute. "They thought I was nothing," she murmured, her words carried softly into the darkness. "But I was everything they never saw coming." In that instant, standing beneath the infinite sky, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of peace, not just for reclaiming her father's legacy, but for discovering her own power. No longer defined by betrayal or loss, she was a force unto herself, forged in fire and tempered by time. As she walked away from the gravesite, her steps were lighter, her heart fuller. She wasn't just Robert Reeves' daughter anymore. She was Emma Reeves, a leader, a survivor, and someone who could no longer be underestimated.